Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Gershon. We got a very special episode this week because we're going to go a little bit outside the box and we're going to talk about all things heavy metal. Yeah! Heavy metal music, folks. Love it. And a lot of times I feel horror and heavy metal kind of go hand in hand because so many horror fans love heavy metal. And I'd say even more so, vice versa. So many metal fans absolutely love horror movies. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of metal, and we're going to talk about some of my favorite bands, some of my favorite albums. So let's just get right into it. We're going to talk about the creation of heavy metal by the legendary Black Sabbath. Before them, you had Led Zeppelin, you had the real hard rocking bands, and some of them did kind of uh, add to heavy metal, add to the formation of heavy metal. But I think the first band that you could actually say was heavy metal is Black Sabbath. And that first album, that first song, Black Sabbath, pretty much encapsulates everything about heavy metal in one song. Listen to that first album and that first song, the song Black Sabbath, is just gave birth to the entire genre, in my opinion. But they came out with a string of classics after that. You had Master of Reality, you had Volume 4, you had Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, you had Sabotage, all classics. But eventually they couldn't get along with the singer Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary Ozzy Osbourne, folks. But they kicked his ass out because he was drugged out of his mind, and he started his own band, and they were hugely successful with Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, Bark at the Moon. He had his own hugely successful solo career. And he's the biggest icon in heavy metal history. One of the biggest stars in the world, probably, in general. But and then after that, you had the new wave of like British heavy metal. You had Iron Maiden, you had Judas Priest. You had a lot of those like old school British metal bands. And along with them came an American band called Queensryche, which they really had that sound too at the beginning, but eventually they came to develop their own style. But the first album had those screeching, high-pitched vocals like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and they had that heavy sound like Iron Maiden. But as they went along, you got The Warning, and then you had Rage for Order, where they really started getting more progressive metal sound. And that culminated with the absolute classic Operation Mindcrime, which was my favorite heavy metal album of all times, folk. I could sing that entire album. I might lose my voice, but I know all the lyrics, and I just listen to that album from start to finish over and over. I love it. But of course, you had the great Iron Maiden, who was just an amazing technical band with a brilliant bass playing of Steve Harris. Now, that band has three guitar players, Yannick Gers, Dave Murray, and Adrian Smith, and you can still hear Steve Harris's bass playing. That's the power of his playing. It's just brilliant. And you have, of course, the operatic vocals of Bruce Dickinson. Before that, they had a man called Paul Di'Anno on the vocals, but he had a more punk rock kind of style voice, and he didn't have that much range. So they got rid of him, and they got Bruce Dickinson, who had a much more of a range in his vocals, and that's how they were able to make those classic albums like Number of the Beast, Power Slave, um, and you had all kinds of classics like Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. Um, Amazing band. And then you had Judas Priest, of course, who had some great albums like Stained Class and British Steel and The Sad Wings of Destiny. And you had amazing vocalist and Rob Halford, who really could hit those high notes, and he had such a great range to his voice. Another thing about Judas Priest that I think is they really lent to the image of heavy metal big time with the leather and the spikes outfits and everything. Uh, Definitely, I think Judas Priest created that kind of image of metal with the leather jackets and the kind of a biker look or whatever. But they definitely brought that to metal, and along with some amazing guitar work in their songs and just a great band. But then after that, you had the thrash movement of the early 1980s. You had 1981 is pretty much when they all started. Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax, Exodus, which Exodus actually had Kirk Hammett when they started, who went on to become the lead guitarist of Metallica, who still is to this day. Um, and then, of course, Metallica, you know the history of them. You had Dave Mustaine in Metallica, who started with as the lead guitarist. And they kicked him out because of his drugged out craziness, which is saying a lot because they were drunk asses themselves. So for them to kick Dave Mustaine out because of drug use and craziness, that's saying a lot. But of course, once he got kicked out of Metallica, he came up with Megadeth. So Megadeth is his brainchild, and another amazing band with awesome albums like Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? Killing is My Business, Business is Good, and the absolutely brilliant Rust in Peace, which is my favorite. Um, some of the greatest metal songs of all times on that album. Amazing guitar work, amazing lyrics and themes, and it's just a phenomenal album. And it's so fast too. Like that's probably the fastest album I've ever heard, maybe. But that's definitely defined speed metal. Rust in Peace. And then you've had the mighty Slayer with Jeff Hanneman and Kerry King and Tom Araya and Dave Lombardo with those awesome drums. And you had that great twin guitar attack of Jeff Hanneman and Kerry King just trading off on blazing guitar solos in your face. And you had those shrieking, snarling vocals of Tom Araya. And to me, Slayer is just a band that encapsulates everything about heavy metal. Nobody represents heavy metal more than Slayer, in my opinion, because you name any genre, it's all in there. Thrash metal, death metal, the satanic stuff. You had the dark witchcraft stuff. You had the serial killer stuff, and all elements are incorporated into Slayer's music. Speed metal, everything is in Slayer. That's why I think Slayer is the greatest heavy metal band of all time, because everything about metal is Slayer. Okay? But rest in peace, Jeff Hanneman. I love Slayer. They have so many phenomenal albums, from Show No Mercy to the Haunting the Chapel EP to Rain in Blood to Hell Awaits to Seasons in the Abyss, South of Heaven. It goes on and on. The amazing discography of Slayer. And of course, Metallica, of course, is absolutely legendary. They have so many great albums. You got Kill 'Em All, which had that real thrash sound. That's where thrash was really born, with Kill 'Em All, And of course, Ride the Lightning is my personal favorite, which I feel takes the thrash that they started with, that raw thrash, angry sound, along with their later, more progressive stuff, more intensity of Master of Puppets style and Justice for All. I think Ride the Lightning is just a perfect blend of both of those. On that really powerful, slower, huge riffs, and that's what Metallic Ride the Lightning has. Like songs like Ride the Lightning and Fight Fire with Fire and For Whom the Bell Tolls. Listen to the power of that song. But love Metallica, and of course they're the biggest band in the world right now, That not even in metal, just in general. Everybody knows who Metallica is because with the Black Album is where they really took off. With they had a more simplistic style, and they started using one main riff throughout each song, and that made it a lot more simple, and people really responded to that, and that's what made them just blow up huge. And then of course you have death metal, which is one of my favorite genres. You got great bands like Morbid Angel, on the band Death. Cannibal Corpse was probably the heaviest band in the world, and just amazing stuff like Carcass. One of my favorite bands who doesn't really get much notice, and that is Necrophagia, which incorporates so many elements of horror movies into their sound. A lot of their songs are about specific horror movies like Zombie, City of the Living Dead, The Howling, The Exorcist. A lot of their songs are actually about horror movies. But their style is so sick, so intense, so evil sounding. But I love it. The sick ass vocals of Killjoy. And guess who was in it? Phil Anselmo at once was in Necrophagia for about 2, 3 albums. He was actually the lead guitarist for Necrophagia. But even after he left, they made some great albums like Harvest Ritual, and the latest one was White Worm Cathedral, which is probably my favorite one, which had the zombie cover there. Great album. But I love Morbid Angel. Their playing is just amazing, so technical and so sick and so evil too. Carcass is just legendary. They started off with that like Morbid Angel style with the over the top gore and a lot of medical terminology with surgical stuff and exhuming dead bodies and pure death. But as they progressed, they got a lot more melodic with heartwork, of course, and they started getting that way in Necroticism, Descanting the Insalubrious. And just the name of their songs are really crazy, real surgical terminology, medical terminology. You need an encyclopedia to read their lyrics and their song titles. But yeah, they progressed a lot with Necroticism, and then Heartwork is where they really shine, and that's just an absolute masterpiece of metal. Heartwork, folks, seek it out, get it now. But yeah, and then now you got the modern day metal. You had new metal for a while in the 90s, which mixed hip hop with metal. You had like Limp Bizkit and Korn, and bands like Disturbed, and you had that wave for a little while in the 90s. You had Rage Against the Machine. You had bands like 311, which actually mixed rap and reggae and heavy metal. And that's a pretty cool band too, 311. I like them. They don't really get too much credit, but I really like their sound. They're still around to this day. And then you had some really heavier bands start to come along, like Chimera, and well, they're really super heavy. And then you had the metalcore movement, which you had bands like Killswitch Engage, which is a great band, one of my favorites. You had Lamb of God, and bands like that. You had Shadows Fall, which is that. So you had that new wave of metal, um, which is still going to this day. You had Slipknot as another classic band, um, one of the biggest bands of the modern age. And they had the crazy masks and stuff, the clown mask and the wicked horror movie style masks in their sound and their repertoire. And they definitely started out like the Slipknot definitely started out with that kind of rap metal thing, but then they got really heavy with the Iowa, especially. And that album is just brutal. It's really sick, real pure anger and aggression in Iowa, and that's for sure. Just outright anger, pure rage and anger, and that's in Iowa from Slipknot. So check that album out. But I guess that's about it. That's all I'm gonna say for today. I mean, I could go on all day long about heavy metal because I absolutely love it. But if you guys don't listen to metal, you definitely should start. Start with some classics like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Queensryche, and then move into the thrash like Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, Anthrax, and then get into some death metal like Death and Carcass and Cannibal Corpse, and just live it and love it all day long. Heavy metal, baby. Thanks for joining me, Sean Patrick Gershon, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.